Testing 1, 2, 3, internet. Internet, can you hear me? You probably can't see me because you're still seeing the intro image that I have showing the 1998 video game Thief the Dark Project, along with starting at 5 p.m. notice, which I think it'll be a minute late. Just checking if you can hear me. Do you copy? Do you copy? And are you drinking your chocolate wine with me? That is the question. Because if you're not drinking chocolate wine with me, I will have the moderators ban you immediately. That is a strict requirement for you to be on the stream. All right. I know you guys don't want to listen to me at all. You want to listen to the guest that I have today. And, you know, if you guys think you're excited to talk to him, I don't think you've known me or how I grew up searching for video games that were on PC, that were 3D, and I look for the people behind the engines and things like that. So trust me, I am really excited to have Mr. Sean Barrett. And I'm not sure if I should call him Sean or if I should call him Sir Barrett, the coding wizard. I think I'll ask him myself. Sean, can you hear me? Wait, hold on. Don't talk. I think you're still muted, and maybe OBS is still causing issues here. Hello? Sean? Oh my God, we can't hear you. That's awful.
There it is. I found my mute button. Sorry.
Whew. All right, I was scared. I was scared for a sec. All right, so is it Sean or is it Sir Barrett? What should I call you?
I think Sean is fine.
You think Sean's fine? Okay. All right, no problem. Thank you for being here, man. Welcome to the Handmade Dev Show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Oh, trust me, it's an honor. And what we're gonna do here, it looks like everybody's pretty excited here. Awesome. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna talk about. Well, for those who don't know, let me just start here. I'm sure there are some new viewers here. Like I haven't seen FFSJS. That's an interesting username. FFSJS. I haven't seen him, and I haven't seen Raoul Berger. Sorry, I can't pronounce the names correctly. So, for those who don't know, this interview stream, Handmade Dev Show, is a way for us to interview guests that are well known in their field, and to pick their brains and see how they began their programming careers, how they got interested in programming in the first place, and how they become, successful. And then on the second half of the stream, we start talking about handmade dev things, what they think about handmade dev, and why they're supporting it or why they're not supporting it. And then we'll take, Q&A from the chat. So you guys can prepare your questions for Mr. Barrett right now, because on the second half of the stream, I'll have him answer most of them, hopefully. So
your audio is breaking up a little bit for me. Is that my headphones, or is that there are people on the stream hear that?
It might be a Hangouts thing. It's happened before, which kind of sucks. So do you hear like a robotic voice?
No, it's just really crackly.
Oh, that's bad. Well, we'll try to fix it soon. But you're not here to listen to me. We're here to listen to you, man. So why don't you take us back? Pretend nobody knows who you are, Sean. Pretend nobody in this chat knows what you've done. You've been frozen and taken into the future 100 years later, where programming is not this sect of religious wars between languages. and they talk to you and they're like, what did you do? How did you get into programming and how did you become successful? So, take us back to Sean Barrett, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, and try to bring us up to speed with your life.
All right, so let's see. I started programming when I was maybe 12 or so, which is a long time ago now. So, boy, I should just know this off the top of my head. I guess that would be something like 1979. I'm a child of the 70s.
Wow.
And, before I started programming at that point, we had very primitive video games, the Atari 2600, which my family had one of those, and I played that. Mm-hmm. And before we got a computer, my mother reminded me of this a few years ago. I used to be really obsessed with making mazes. I would just make them. I don't know that they were interesting mazes or anything, but they, that was the thing. So that sort of turned. I think that's the origins of the sort of game designer part of my
Yes.
my life, which we're not going to talk about.
Okay.
So, but it kind of all connects together a little bit, the game dev and the programming. So at 12, started high school, got a computer, actually started programming at work, at school. And then we got a home computer and, an 8-bit, Atari 8-bit, and was programming BASIC on that, started learning assembly on it so I could get it to go faster.
Nice.
And go ahead.
No, awesome. Yeah. Keep going.
And my school library had 2 magazines, Creative Computing and Byte magazine. And Byte magazine was much more technical. And I started consuming those pretty religiously. And there was an article which maybe a year or two ago, I retweeted. I dug it up online. There's all the archives of Byte, which was doing 3D graphics. And, it was covered the math, covered some linear algebra that you needed to know and some other stuff. And, so that was in my teens. I learned that stuff. Couldn't do it on the Atari 8-bit very well, but I, did what I could. And then I went to college. And in college, I was a computer science major and a philosophy major, both.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Nice. Yeah, well, and so in the end, I decided that philosophy, once I had received enough of a philosophy education, I decided the philosophy education was worthless. So I don't really talk about it that much.
Oh, gotcha.
It sort of negates itself. It becomes clear how irrelevant it is to itself when you get in deep enough. In my taste. Anyway, so programming. So in college, I got away from graphics because on the Atari I was doing games and graphics, and then when I was in college we were using Unix machines mostly. Mm-hmm. When I started, no, let's forget that tangent. Okay, so so I spent too many years in college, and basically, I got an IBM PC, but I was staying with the sort of text, like text adventures and stuff like that, stuff that wasn't graphical. But when was there anything else interesting in the college stuff? Not really. Hey, it's college.
Right.
So I'll put a year on one of these for the first time. So in 1992, I graduated college. I'd really only been doing this sort of Unix programming. I was doing, I'd written multiple interpreters and written the implementation of a malloc. I'd done a bunch of technical stuff that had nothing to do with my classes.
Okay. Was it just a hobby, side projects?
Yeah. So because I'd always been programming on the Atari, it was, the college education in programming was secondary to my programming career. Like I learned some stuff that I wouldn't have easily picked up otherwise, but I was a programmer independent of college. That was part of why I got the philosophy degree was the college I was going to wasn't that strong in computer science. And I was like, maybe I shouldn't bother with the computer science degree. I can program fine. I don't need it. And I'll do something else. So I spent a lot of time. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Did you get any value out of your programming degree at all then? My data structures class, gave me a sort of fast tour of a lot of that kind of stuff. And there's a particular algorithm called the plane sweep rectangle intersection algorithm, which I immediately applied at my very first job. I had learned it 2 years earlier, and then I got to this job, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't know how to solve this problem of intersecting these rectangles efficiently enough." And I'll actually explain that in a second. I might as well. That'll be a fun thing to dive down into. Yeah.
But for the most part, no. Like most of what I got out of most of the computer science curriculum was checking off marks. I mean, so the class in computer architecture was really good. I got to learn more details about how computers work deep down. I knew some of that stuff, and the sort of more rigorous approach, mainly because there's that Hennessy and Patterson book that they keep revising. That is sort of a canonical thing that for education, and that's just a really strong book. Those guys are. It wasn't my instructor. It was that book was really solid. Nice. Not to knock. I don't even know who the teacher was, but and I took 2 classes from the guy who invented skip lists. So that's at least at the time, it was like the only modern data structure. It's a terrible data structure that nobody uses in practice, but it's like when you learn data structures, it's like the only one that wasn't invented in the 60s, it seems like.
Okay, gotcha.
And he happened to be at my university. So anyway.
Yeah, go on.
So I was avoiding the computer science degree, and I took a lot of classes in different subjects and to try to find what else I could major in, and eventually went down the philosophy path looking for that. But once I was a little ways down the philosophy path, I was like, I might as well do the computer science as well. And I did a double degree, except that I didn't actually technically get the philosophy. I met all the requirements for the philosophy degree, and I didn't get it. And when that happened, for lack of a better terms, it was just, bureaucratic snafu. That's not really accurate, but close enough. But I was like, you know what? It's just not worth my time. I'm graduating. I'm going to go get a job programming. I don't need the philosophy degree. I'm not going to worry about it.
So you just let it go. Oh.
Yeah. So, I just tell everyone, hey, I met the requirements for the philosophy degree. So don't actually have it. Anyway, because it's worthless, I don't mind not having it.
Yeah, but you're a philosopher though now. Like you can call yourself that.
Yeah, I could. Well, only I'm not a doctor of philosophy, so I only got a bachelor's, or worked on a bachelor's. So
I see. Yeah, gotcha.
So I graduated and I went to Texas. So this was all on the East Coast, and I went to Texas because there was a little company that some friends of mine were working at that was founded by some ex-grad students from Texas A&M, so it was where Texas A&M was. Mm-hmm. And I went to Texas for 2 years to work at this company that was basically a startup, made software that lived inside printers. So it took PostScript as input and needed to output a bitmap. Okay. And they had that whole system going, and we were porting it to new systems. And there's a lot of interesting tech in there. But one of the things was that to solve some of the problems that they had, they sent the text that was rendered by a different route than the graphics. And the text, had little bounding squares or rectangles. And so what they needed to do was detect if graphics ever got drawn on top of text and process the text specially if that happened. Yeah. And that was why they needed the rectangle intersection, was to find those collisions.
Oh.
So I spent 2 years doing that and doing text muds. But the important thing that happened there was that these other guys who I knew online, that was how I found out about the job. We started playing games on the IBM PC that were graphics games. So we played Ultima 7 and we played Ultima Underworld. And this is 92 to 94. And so I started getting back into like having graphics around, and one or two of the other programmers, we found Michael Abrash's Dr. Dobbs series on Mode X programming and 3D graphics programming, which is coming out. I think it had come out a few months earlier, and the company had the whichever magazine Dr. Dobbs had those stocked up. So we went through them and we competed with each other to write a little 3D graphics programming thing, and just drawing lots of cubes, drawing whatever. I made a sort of Ultima Underworld clone graphics engine, none of the game. And then that company that we were at went belly up, and I had to get a new job. And I knew online a guy who worked at this company called Looking Glass Technologies at the time. Oh my God. Looking Glass Studio Player. And I knew him online and in a totally different, it was sort of a creative writing group for sort of weird creative writing. And it was on Usenet. And
for games? Writing for games? Or
No, it was just people writing. It had nothing to do with games. But there was this guy, I didn't know him personally, he was just in that group. And I knew they had done that game, and I loved that game. And I was in Texas, and they were in Boston. And so but they were published by this company called Origin, who had done the Ultimas, and Origin was in Texas. So I emailed this guy that I sort of knew, and I said, hey, I need a job can you give me pointers to or connect me up with somebody in Texas so I can go work for Origin? And he was like, why don't you come up here and work for us instead?
Right.
So I sent them a bunch of demos and they loved them. And I went to Looking Glass. And I spent 7 years at Looking Glass. And so Looking Glass is this company that made the Ultima Underworld, made System Shock 1, collaborated with System Shock 2, made Thief of the Dark Project and Thief 2.
Oh, God, yes.
Made some games called Flight Unlimited and Flight Unlimited 2. And those are all interesting things that I can talk about, but my involvement with them was limited other than Thief. So I don't know if we want to go into the game stuff at all or not.
Oh, we will. I don't know if you want to continue with your timeline.
I can just do the timeline and then we can come back.
Exactly. That'll be awesome.
Yeah. So I worked there for 7 years, and that company struggled financially a lot. Got acquired, got sold. The problem was that we were sort of making intellectual games that had sort of a limited appeal.
That's sad.
It had good appeal, but just not quite enough. And Thief was sort of our big breakthrough, but it wasn't enough to keep the whole company going. In fact, we released Thief 2 and almost immediately closed. I think we probably never saw the money from Thief 2. So
Jesus.
Just how one of those things goes. So that was 2001 when that shutdown happened. And so then I decided I'm going to try being an indie game developer. And I just launched out to be an indie game developer. And over the next 7 years, I didn't finish any of the large indie games that I was trying to make.
Okay.
I released a few games that I basically wrote the game in a weekend, but I couldn't finish the games that were longer than that. And all those games are available for free.
Nice.
And then 2008, I helped a little bit on Braid, the game by Jonathan Blow, who just released The Witness. So I did a little bit of programming on Braid. And then I was like, this indie game development thing just isn't working out for me, and I got to get a real job. And of course, Braid was sort of around the time when indie games went from being... it was sort of the golden age of indie games right after that. So it's possible I picked the wrong time to step out. But since it was largely because I was failing, not because of the market, it was probably still the right choice. And so then 2008, I went to work for Rad Software. And I'll have to come back a little bit to connect the dots here. But
looking for a link?
My Firefox just crashed.
Oh, duh. That's...
But apparently the plugin keeps running or something. Oh, maybe now it died.
Because, we're still talking.
Yeah. Is my video gone, though?
No, you look perfect.
All right.
There's no issue. This is weird.
The browser crashed, but the plugin kept running because it's in a separate process.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I can reconnect Hangouts and actually see anything at this point. But that's okay. As long as it's working, it's working. All right. So.
Yeah, it is. So let's just forget about that and move on. It's awful, though. Uh-oh. Sean, speak to me. Sean, speak to me.
Here I am.
All right.
All right, tell me where I was when it died.
Yeah. Let me just see if I can get you up on the OBS thing again.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So it seems like it'll work. I just have to shut down the camera from the Hangouts area, and then go back here. All right. Yeah, it looks perfect. I have some music on. Let me turn that off. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. Firefox did not win against us. We are stronger than software. I hope. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, we're good. All right, Sean, I think you left talking about, you did 7 years of indie game development, but it didn't really turn out to be your thing. And then I think it stopped from there.
Yeah. Okay. So I had done some contract work while I was doing indie development just to have cash flow. And one of the things I'd done was did some work for RAD, making the Vorbis library, which is one of the STB libraries, which I'll come back to. So I had been doing these STB libraries that were pretty related to the work that RAD does. RAD makes game software libraries for professional developers. And so there was an obvious relationship there, and the owner of RAD was pretty sure that that would be a good fit. So he offered me the job, and he had asked in the past, and at this point I was ready to give up and try something new. So I went ahead with that and went to RAD. It's not really that interesting there. I make a software that's basically Flash player that you put in your game for the user interface. You author your user interface in Flash. So I'm the sole author of this Flash player, basically.
Wow.
And that brings us to now. So the thing that I kind of skipped over there was the STB libraries, because it's a really small portion of what I do with my life and with programming. Yeah. So, but it's sort of what I'm known for, at least in these communities. So I want to circle back to it a little bit.
Okay.
And the origin of that is a little complicated. I have multiple things came together that led to that. So one of the stories there is that when I was at Looking Glass, I had a library that I needed to write to get something done, and it had nothing to do with games. It was just a programming, meta programming-y kind of thing. And I wrote it, and I got that thing done. And then when I was doing the indie stuff, I was like, you know what would be useful would be this library. And it's too late. Like, that was Looking Glass library. It's gone. Like, there's nothing I can do. So I was like, I've got to write it again.
Yeah.
But there's nothing I can do about that now. But maybe in the future, when I have other libraries, I can avoid that. And so I told myself, and there was no guarantee this would work, I would have a policy of trying to make these libraries that I did for companies reusable. And a way of doing that was to either do it on my own time rather than as part of their time. But maybe they don't care. They'd be willing to. If I'm giving it away to everyone.
Gotcha.
And I make them public domain so that, if I'm contracting on a project, I can just drop it in and I don't have to worry about them fighting about whether that's okay. And technically, if it were open source, I could still if it were my software, I could still license it under another thing to that company. It wouldn't have to be open source for them. But I just don't even want to have that debate. And I just didn't see enough value to putting an open source license on it. For the kind of stuff that I'm doing.
Isn't that a pretty radical thing to do back then, though?
It is and it isn't. I certainly don't know anyone else who was doing it at the time. The SQLite is public domain, and that was probably at the same time, but I didn't know about it at the time. One inspiration was there was an artist who was just doing sketches, and he was putting them in the public domain. And so when I started doing these things that I call the music sketchbook, because I'm also a musician, and they're just like sketches, so they're kind of demos. They're not really high quality. But I was just like, I'm never going to make money from music, so why bother? And I just put those things in the public domain as well. So I'd already kind of been exposed to that. It was also after we'd done the Indie Game Jam, which isn't public domain or anything, but it was just kind of had an influence on my perception of crediting and value and stuff like that. And, it's the public domain thing is partly just gets it out of, just makes it easier for everyone involved.
Oh, yeah,
and,
for sure.
There's, there's a sort of viral nature to that too, not in the sense of the GPL, but in the sense that if I want the most number of people to use it, make it as easy as possible for the maximum number of people to use it. And so that's sort of one of the philosophies behind the FTP libraries. Which is one of the things like Casey will talk about. Don't know if he's talked about on Handmade Hero, but the idea that, or actually, I guess John Blow has talked about more, which is this idea that people release these things, but they don't go, like they'll do an academics or somebody will release something, and when it's just a research project, that's fine. But if they go ahead and open source it, it's like, go the extra distance to make sure it's easy to build and et cetera. Don't just throw it up on the web and say, well, maybe somebody gets some value from it. It's like,
that's a very pervasive mindset that's still going on today.
It is, and it's just a sort of a human thing. I'm trying to think of it, and I've seen this in unrelated to programming circumstances, and I can't think of a good example, but one would be, just somebody who, I've got this archive of stuff and I'm dumping it here. I hope somebody gets some use out of it, but it needs to be sorted through. And if you can do a distributed sort, if everyone can work together to sort through it, that's fine. But if it's this thing where everyone downloads it separately and then they all have to sort through it, everyone's doing the same work over and over again.
Yes.
So it's understandable from the laziness sense that the people would do that, but the difference in value there, because if there's no way to distribute that organizing, if everyone does have to do it, you're wasting so many people's time. So it's that same philosophy.
Yeah. So it's I guess if you want to look at it from the perspective of a product, they're not really releasing a product, because a product should have that organizational, thing imbued in it. Like it should already be primed for people to use in a way that's, like you said, easy to deploy, easy to make use of. Now, before you continue with your timeline, I do have a question for you. So, you said 1992. I was a year old when it was 1992. And I grew up in this environment of programming where I know it's vastly different from your environment, right? Like if I go to class or if I go to work, well, not necessarily work. I work at a good place. But, with friends that are outside of work or with a school, the way they program is vastly different from what I think was in the past, which is, they just look at some things that, Google or Yahoo or whatever. They look at solutions that have already been posted for their kind of problem, and then they're just stitching together these black boxes to get their Frankenstein code to work. And I'm wondering if that was the case with you, or how was the programming environment with you, with your coworkers? How is that different from, let's say, today?
Well, so one thing is I can't say, I'm not very good at making analogies to today because I don't actively work in that kind of environment myself. So I just hear the horror stories.
God. It's always bad. There's never I'm sorry, go on.
That's, so, one of the things, as I said, so I was thinking we talk about this more when we get to talking about Handmade, but, there's this whole thing where the people from my generation, we grew up on these computers that you just turned the computer on and you could instantly start programming it. And everything ran at 60 frames per second. Terrible tangent here, but
no problem.
I can't figure out how to unpack this without the tangent, because if you're young enough that you don't know what a CRT is, I kind of have to explain that.
Okay.
So, in graphics programming, you have this buffer that represents an image that is somehow getting sent to your monitor. So just something somewhere in the system transmits this image to your monitor, and it comes into your monitor sequentially. It's sending a pixel at a time, maybe top left, to bottom right. And the LCD that's potentially is displaying all of them at the same time. But there is still that sort of serial sequence of pixels going on.
Yeah.
And back in the day, we had these things called CRTs, where that was actually an analog process that was just part of the display mechanism, which is that instead of having all these independent lights on your screen, you had a big array of phosphors, and there was an electron gun shooting a beam of electrons at these phosphors to make them light up. And it would sweep across the thing, top left to bottom right, very, very fast. And you would modulate the intensity of the beam to turn individual phosphors bright and dark as it swept. And so the analog signal you're sending across to a CRT is how bright the electron beam needs to be as it sweeps. But you're not controlling the sweep. The monitor is controlling the sweep. So there's this incredible synchronization going on there. Upshot of all that is that analog signal that's coming out of your computer or Atari 2600 back then, it was generated from a digital processor displaying the graphics.
Yeah.
But it had to just generate those signals in time, representing what was being displayed. Now, we're used to thinking that you have this pre-built image and you're just sending out the pixels of this image. But on those very, very early systems like the Atari 2600 or Pong before that, they didn't have memory for a frame buffer is what that's called. And so they would just dynamically generate exactly the data you needed on the fly somehow. So in something like Pong, there's 3 objects on the screen, and there's just a little bit of logic that at every pixel decides which object can you see at this point, which color should I be. There's just a little circuit that could do that. It's not like a shader or something. It's just this physical circuit.
Wow, you're blowing my mind here.
So the Atari 2600 was like the more advanced version of that, where it had a computer driving, a CPU driving this process, but there was still circuitry doing this compositing of 4 things dynamically as it's generating the analog signal to send to the monitor or TV, actually, to display that final signal. And that whole process is called racing the beam, because the idea is that the CPU has to sit there keeping track of where it is while you're writing the code. It doesn't you keep track of it. You're keeping track of where the electron beam basically is conceptually, as your code is executing. That was the notorious thing about the 2600. And there's a very interesting book called Racing the Beam, if you want to know more about this.
But why did that happen? Okay, is this because of memory constraints? Was it?
Yes. So the Atari 2600 had 128 bytes of RAM. Bytes. That was because memory was incredibly expensive back then. In this particular case, that's on-chip memory, and there was no off-chip memory at all. So, they were making a consumer product, and RAM is really expensive, so there was no actual off-chip RAM. There was just the memory on the chip.
I need to bow down now to you guys. How did you
So I never programmed the Atari 2600. Seriously, I do recommend that book, Racing the Beam, if you want to know more.
I'll definitely check it out.
It's aimed at a non-technical level. So, he kind of goes into technical details and kind of doesn't in I think, a good balanced way. So whatever technical level you're at, it's useful. It's by Nick Montfort, and I forget the other author, but Racing the Beam, search on Amazon or whatever.
Oh yeah, somebody in the chat already linked to the link to the book. Yep. So thank you, Dr. Jeets. Yeah. Where was I? Okay, so you have all this crazy racing going on. Now, why did I bring this up? What was I tangenting from? You were talking about it's only 128 bytes, and then you had to do this back then as opposed to now.
But so what was my original branch point from this? Why did I start this tangent?
Not too much wine.
I'm waiting for somebody in the chat to tell me where I was when I started the tangent.
Yeah.
So surely somebody will remember.
Yeah, hopefully. I'm completely lost. How you made that?
Yeah, old enough to know what a CRT is, but what?
Public domain.
Oh, that's too far back. Oh dear, there was some actual point I was going for, and
60 FPS?
60 frames per second. There you go. That was it. So the whole thing is because those things were just generating the image directly as the frame was happening. There was no reason that the very next frame had to be the same. The Atari 2600 was computing off of a few hardware registers, so you could easily update those every frame. There was no good reason not to just run your game at 60 frames per second. On the 8-bit computers, it's a little bit different, but it was still pretty commonplace to have games that ran at 60 frames per second. Something like the Apple II, that wasn't true, but the ones that had graphics hardware built into them, that was very common. So we had this environment in which we kind of took for granted that you could easily program your devices and that they should be slick and responsive. Casey has talked about the whatever the Amiga editor was that's super slick and responsive.
Yeah, but this was out of necessity, was what you're saying.
Well, no. In that case, that was the programmer being very careful to make sure that all was achieved. But it was because by that point, on the Amiga, you did have a full frame buffer. but we were used to had that experience. So there was more incentive for him to want to get that going back.
Okay. Yeah.
So, we were talking about that. The whole question was about the difference in the programming and things. And so one of the things that was interesting to me about Handmade is that, like the Handmade manifesto and just dev in general, is that I come from this previous generation where we were really used to this stuff, and I kind of looked disparagingly as an old man, get off my lawn, old man, at all the JavaScript frameworks and all that stuff, and feel like that curmudgeonliness is in part because of my age. So it's really, really nice to see the next generation, some people going, this makes no sense, this is all terrible, everyone is doing it wrong. It's not that those old fuddy-duddies are right, just that it is inherently wrong. Like, that's super awesome. So like I said, I don't have much direct exposure to that stuff to compare them. I just have exposure to people bitching about it and you as a group's reaction to that.
Yes, and tell you what, most of the community here are really young people, right? We're talking 19, 20, 21. Yep. That's sort of the demographic that the community is targeted towards, even though we have obviously older programmers. So I don't know. It seems like every generation has these people that really understand what it means to program something that's of high quality and that's performant. But why do you think that most companies and most people in the software industry, because we're really a minority, right? Yeah, I believe we're always going to be a minority. I don't know your thoughts on that. But like, why is it rampant? Why is software so bloated and shitty and broken? Why is that the case? If we had quality software back then, was the necessity to do that removed because of all the power? Is that it? Is that all? I don't know what you think. But
it's such a speculative question. I know. So maybe. Like I kind of don't. Like, I can't even express why I don't want to express an opinion, like, without sounding like a blowhard here. But, as an experienced, skilled hacker, for lack of, in the traditional hacker sense, like, I consider myself in sort of the upper echelon of programmers. And so it's very easy for me to kind of look at all these other people and just go, well, they're not that good. They don't know what they're doing. They are just, scrabbling in the dirt, trying to figure out how to make it work. So, of course, it's all messed up. But that's sort of my natural instinct, but I'm also self-reflective enough to know that I just don't really know. And there may be forces that make sense. I mean, one of the things is that that could be a factor and may not be a factor. It's just that, like, the role of what computers do is very different now from what they did 30 years ago. You need a lot more of it. It's doing a lot more different stuff. You have 100 million lines of code in a car or whatever. That's just this huge, and I picked that one data point out, trying to imply that there's this huge spectrum of things that are being done. And so there is just a lot more software, and conditions are different. Yeah, like, it's really hard to say.
It's hard to say, and but schools value a way of programming that just doesn't consider you to go and dig behind the scenes. It's more like just leverage the tools that people have already created.
Yeah.
And that's probably not a good thing. So I guess that's...
Yeah, well, it just crashed again.
Oh my God. Do you think you'll survive this time?
I should probably switch to Chrome, but it may take me a while to get that installed into Chrome.
Well, I think we're supposed to have a break right now, right? So
all right.
Why don't we have a 3 to 5 minute break, okay? And then we'll come back and we'll talk more about programming things, the Thief project, and more Handmade dev things, all right?
All right.
So see you guys in 3 to 5 minutes. Grab your beers, go to the bathroom, and we'll be right back. And also prepare your questions for Sean Barrett, because we're going to have him answer your questions directly from the viewers. Thank you.
right. Okay, I gotta get my drink, so I might take a little bit, but
Hello, Internet. Welcome to the second half of this interview stream with the one and only Sean Barrett, lead engine developer of Thief, the Dark Project from 1998, and the author of the widely popular STB libraries. I'm very excited to talk to him. I've been following his work and his adventures for years, actually. So it's been a fun, interesting talk, despite technical difficulties. I'd be hard pressed to believe for people to not even have heard of the name Thief, the Dark Project, right? So I am playing a quick video of the game from Johnny Fox. I'm wondering if Sean is with me. Can you hear me, Sean?
Yeah, I can.
All right, perfect. So we were talking about a lot of interesting things by the end of the first half, but we'll pick it up a little bit later if it's okay with you, just so you can talk about Thief, the Dark Project, and what you did in that engine at a high level if you want to, and whether or not you enjoyed it, if you would do it again, things like that, just a high level, overview.
Sure. I'm typing in chat.
No problem.
I wasn't the lead engine developer. I was the lead renderer developer. The engine in a game does many things besides the rendering, and the only thing I had control over was the rendering. It's
Gotcha.
the thing that everyone's sort of most familiar with because the graphics are like what you see immediately. And
Yeah.
so it feels like what you're seeing is the graphics and the level design. And like that sort of feels like what's there. But there are very large teams making these games. And the rendering is one of the most complicated technically usually, but not necessarily even the largest programming part of the team. And on Looking Glass in particular, back in these days, this was very different. I'll talk a little bit more in a second, but what the big thing at the time was something like Quake. This is a very similar engine to Quake, and what happened at a company like id Software was to some extent John Carmack was sort of like, well, what's a neat technology I can do? Now let me design this engine sort of around pushing this technology as far as it can be pushed, and then let's, to some extent, design the game around exploiting that technology really well.
I see.
And at Looking Glass, I would make this technology, and then the designers could say, okay, I really want the game to work this way. So, we're just going to use this engine that way. It doesn't matter. That's not what it was intended to do, or it's not the most efficient use of that engine. Now, that's a sort of parody of an exaggeration of things. Like, they were certainly aware of the limitations, and at the same time, something like Doom was very clearly a strong design. It wasn't like a design that was hampered by the constraints of the technology. But so there's always a little bit of a feedback between the two, but to a certain extent that was sort of true. And so when I went to Looking Glass, I sort of had this philosophy of well, surely since these are software rendered, surely and the graphics is this intense thing that's got to produce all these pixels on the screen and do all this work. It's very complicated technically. Surely the 90 to 95% of the CPU time will be spent in the graphics. And, we were lucky. And I think they were at id Software. I think in Quake or Doom or something like that, that probably is true. But at Looking Glass, because we had these game programmers and designers who were really pushing games, not pushing graphics, it was probably, I don't know actual numbers, but it was probably 60% or 50% even of the CPU time was going to the graphics. So it hampered my ability to be a graphics powerhouse of the Carmack flavor, but that's okay because I liked those games more anyway. Even though I didn't contribute to the design of them, I was glad to help those people achieve their goal with creating these wonderful games.
Fair enough.
Where did that whole tangent come from? We were talking about, what the graphics is like. So yes. So this whole thing is software rendered. So there's no graphics processor. Well, I mean, this video that you're playing, who knows, that this could be because Thief 2 did get ported to GPUs and System Shock 2 was GPU only, if I recall correctly.
I see.
So it's all software rendered. And so the software has to solve a whole bunch of problems. With graphics, if you've ever done any 3D graphics programming, you'll be familiar with the Z buffer, which automatically resolves hidden surfaces. When one surface is in front of another, it stores the coordinates that the pixels are at and uses that to resolve which pixel is closer. And we couldn't afford to do that in software. The extra computation and the extra memory usage and cache of storing a Z buffer was problematic. And so, for example, this thing has to determine hidden surfaces, try to determine which surfaces are probably hidden and not draw them at all, and then draw the remaining ones back to front. It's an old classic
true. And you also had to reduce overdraw, right? I know Quake reduced overdraw by using a span buffering like edge list technique. What it
that was how Quake did it was basically span buffering, although it's sort of a higher level thing. And in this, we used a guy named Seth Teller had a thesis that was about something called portals and cells, nothing to do with the portals in Valve's game. But this idea that, if you want to draw a mirror, you reflect the camera around and redraw the scene from the other side. It's sort of like that mirror is sort of a portal into a reversed world. And so the way a portal-based renderer works is at the boundary, on the screen that I'm looking at now, there's, a some stairs and a door, and just lots of ins and out. And in this volume, there are lots of invisible portals chopping the whole space up into convex pieces, and then it's tracking the visibility through the portals, and it draws back to front so that if a pixel is drawn more than once, it appears correctly. But to minimize that overdraw, it clips all the polygons against the portals that they're visible through, so it doesn't draw the polygons. Approximately. It's too expensive to actually clip them to the portal, so it clips them to a bounding approximation to the portals. So there's just tons of stuff like that. There's how the optimized inner loop, for pushing out the individual pixels works, and these were much slower machines back then. So there was no bilinear filtering like Casey has done for Handmade Hero. There's the inner loops of these are very simple. They're just trying to grab a pixel from a texture map and light it and push it to the screen as fast as it can.
But speaking of texture mapping, like what did you use any sort of effects, texture mapping effects for?
In software rendering, there's like no time to do anything. So the basic idea with Quake here is that it's light mapped. So there's a texture representing the material, and then there's a differently scaled texture representing the light playing across a given wall. And rather than in the inner loop, it tries to combine them. It actually combines them in something called a surface cache, where it pre-bakes a final texture that's already been lit, and which is unique for everything in the world. So all of these things are actually drawing from unique textures, and it just keeps a cache of what you can currently see pre-lit. And that was a technique from Quake.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah, looking at the clip, it's fascinating. Although I'm going to try and go back to our faces just so people can see us again. All right, awesome. So how was, again, I want to get like your thoughts on that experience of you developing that software renderer for the graphics. Like, was it a good experience? Would you do it again as extensively as you did back then?
Well, it doesn't have that much to do with programming. So the first project I worked on at Looking Glass was called Terra Nova, and I think we had, I don't know, somewhere from 3 to 6 programmers. System Shock 1, which I didn't really work on, was like 2 or 4 programmers. And then Thief, I can't honestly remember how many programmers it was, but Thief 3, which we didn't, there was a different Thief 3, the actual released one, but Looking Glass started a Thief 3 before it shut down. And we had an engine team. So we were just making the engine. It had nothing to, like, game programmers would have been separate. And that engine team was, there were 2 graphics people. So I want to say it was somewhere between 6 and 8 people on that engine.
Oh.
I kind of had an interesting history with Looking Glass because I was a little bit frustrated with its inability to, what I felt like was management's inability to stay focused on what we were good at. There were some oddball games that we did, like there was a golf game that Looking Glass made.
Nice.
And so I actually quit Looking Glass in frustration twice. So I actually was hired at Looking Glass 3 times because I quit, got rehired, and then quit and got rehired. And one of those times I quit literally so I could do graphics research. I was like, they could not find time for me to actually do research. And so I quit, did research for 3 months, came back, and I said, here's the stuff I've done. And that was the starting point for the Thief 3 engine. So I just did the work on my own dime. It was like, but that was the only way I was going to get to do it. So, so there was that corporate restriction, and then there was the like team interaction. And so the third time the second time they rehired me, so the third time I was there, I was like, I need an office because we all worked in open pits, and I was like, this time around, I'm going to work 8-hour days, and I want an office. And so they gave me that, and that like cut me off from some of the overhead of the team inefficiencies. I really liked working in the open pits because you were more collaborative, you shared ideas more rapidly, you overheard other people talking about stuff that you might have an interesting thing to say that they would never have brought it up in front of you. On the other hand, hearing lots of irrelevant stuff distracting you, that's a whole debate I don't want to get into.
Yeah.
But my point about all that is that after I did that, had that experience, that's the only large, quote unquote, large team. And a modern game development large team is, 10 to 50 times as large or whatever. That was the largest that I got at, because the startup I worked at before that was even smaller, and I kind of was soloing most of my projects on startup.
Yes.
So the printer startup. So then I went indie for 7 years, and so I was just programming by myself. And I was like, you know what? I work way better when I'm just programming by myself because I get to use my own coding style. I don't have to, interact with other people's designs. I mean, these are all things everyone has to deal with. Absolutely.
Yes.
But except John Carmack, because he can, let's say, everyone has to do it, build it around me and make him efficient, which, awesome. It was great that he found that environment where he was able to do that. Totally success story, totally replicate that if you can. But I couldn't. And so I had been working by myself at that point for so long. I could, when I decided to go back and get a job in 2008, Rad is a company where I get to own the code. It's my project. I have total control over it. I have one guy, Fabian Rigorous on
Who's
Twitter.
Here, by the way.
Who is here, contributed to it significantly, but it's my product. And he had to just make do and work in my style. He works on multiple products and he switches his indentation style as needed, Rad gave me that opportunity to keep working as a solo programmer and not deal with the team stuff. And I just couldn't picture doing the team stuff anymore. I felt like it's not that bad if I only work at half speed because I'm working on a team. It's not the greatest thing, but you put four of me together in a group, and if each of us works at 50%, that might be pretty good.
Yes.
If you put me together with three weaker programmers and you cut my productivity in half, that doesn't feel very good. Is that actually a net improvement? But the biggest problem, even with it's four of me, is that I just feel better working at 100% than I feel working at 50%. It's bad for my morale. And so I couldn't picture going back into the industry and facing a large team. I would think I would be okay on a team of 2 to 4. But there aren't lots of opportunities like that. So what was the question? You were talking about, you had asked about...
we went from technical questions to back again to how you feel about things. But I think I'm just trying to tie up the first half.
Oh, right. You were talking. Wait, was this all an answer to that the young people question?
Yes.
Okay. So, boy, I can't remember how this connects to the young people question, but clearly it did.
It did.
What was the actual question about the young people? Am I surprised? What was the?
Yeah, back with the young people, it was like. We were talking about, before we cut off the stream, we were talking about how you felt about, how you felt about software being pushed as this overloaded kind of thing, and then you sort of gave examples of why that's the case, potentially. Well,
that was an earlier question too, though.
Yes,
and you were kind of trying to hit it from a different angle, I think, and I kind of just turned it back to the same question.
Exactly.
But
that's fine.
So, I mean, this whole question is just like a combination of things that I don't really know and understand and don't have exposure to because I've stayed away from team programming. So, one point here is that whole like stitching together frameworks and libraries and stuff like that is actually a topic that has come up again and again in the past. So there's the classic No Silver Bullet essay by, the name escapes me offhand, and I'm sure chat will say.
I'm sure the chat, yeah.
And I think it was a follow-up 10 years later or something, but it might have been in the original, where he talked about the idea that reusable components was a way to step around the no silver bullet issue. So I don't want to go too far into this, but the no silver bullet issue is just, he predicted that there would be no revolution in programming. Nobody would come along and say, I found a new way of improving programming. We are now 10 times faster or 10 times better or whatever. There was never going to be a silver bullet. Nobody's going to invent a new language that really changes things that dramatically. And so this, I think it was an addendum 10 years later, he was like, maybe reusable components is going to be the mechanism by which we get 10x better. And I think it is what has let us produce 10 times as many programs in some sense.
Yes.
Because now you can just stitch stuff together. But so what I was going to say is the No Silver Bullet article, Rigorous will know, was, I don't know, the 60s or 70s. I don't remember. So the follow-up was in the 80s, maybe. I'm just totally guessing here, but it's plausible that he would have said this in the 80s. So we were already talking about reusable components in the 80s. It was a thing that we could see as possibly a good idea. And even that printer software company, my roommate who worked there, he left early when he saw it was before it quite failed, and he went to a company where I see if I can remember this.
Yeah.
The way he explained it to me was that they took Visual Basic and stitched together an OCR, optical character recognition, an out of the box. They just got an out of the box DLL from somebody, and they stitched that together with VB6 to something else and sold it at massive profits. And he just made it sound like it was the most trivial, dumb, stupid programming ever. And the company that I was at was making this really sophisticated PostScript interpreter, graphics, blah, 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 very hard technical challenge, and was struggling to stay afloat. And, he jumped ship and went to this company where he made easy money stitching components together. So, that was the 90s. And so, like, I already saw that coming in some sense. Like, none of that was a surprise. And that it is a messy solution that causes lots of problems is not surprising to me either. But I've stayed away from that space, so I don't have a very informed opinion about it.
All right, and will you ever go back to that space? Like, I'm not sure what you plan to do in the next 10 years, for example.
Well, that space it's not something I can go back to, because I was talking about the space of plugging shit together, or equivalently JavaScript frameworks.
JavaScript, AngularJS. Oh God.
I wanted to say, this is a total tangent, but I was trying to work this in earlier, and I never found the right spot for it. I was talking about how glorious it was back on those 8-bit computers where everything ran at 60 frames per second, and you could boot it and immediately start programming.
Yes.
So save that thought now for the thing I'm about to say, which is there has been some discussion in some quarters, not talking about Handmade, just in general, where people are talking about programming, and people like me, people of the same mindset, are a little bit worried about, let's say before Handmade happened.
Yes.
We're a little bit worried about what the new generation of people encountering computers were experiencing, because they have these closed mobile devices that they can't program on. They have languages like JavaScript, which are like... it's not the end of the world, but it's not like PHP. JavaScript is not like that bad, but it doesn't feel. There's a lot of stuff in JavaScript that doesn't feel right, and so it was really kind of easy to look at that and go, "Oh, these guys are just fucked because they're just having the wrong set of experiences coming into this. They're going to be terrible programmers because they're going to have been educated wrong, and they're working with all these shitty things."
Yes.
To be fair, though, any of us who were saying that was total bullshit, because we started on BASIC, which is the worst fucking language ever also. So if we survived BASIC and turned into the programmers we are, we have no excuse to be talking shit about people learning from JavaScript or PHP, whatever. Learning from it. You obviously should not stay programming it. But that's not going to rot your mind. Or the other one is Java. Everyone learning Java in university. Everyone's like, oh my God, they're learning this object-oriented stuff. They're just ruined. Yeah. And it's like, no, you're not ruined. If we could survive BASIC, you guys can survive Java.
Okay.
So that was my little tangent I was trying to work in earlier and I had forgotten about. So now let's pop that back to what we were just talking about, which was we were just finishing off the reusable component stuff.
Yes.
Oh yeah, and so you would ask, well, what do I see myself doing? So I was saying I'm never going to be stitching together reusable components. Clearly, I have no clue. I expect to get back into games. The thing is, I'm really a technologist. Like, that's my strong suit. I enjoy game design and level design in some sense. And in an ideal world, I would retire and just make video games without trying to make money from them. But I'm not quite at that point yet. But I hope, as long as my mind is functional, I hope and expect I will still be programming. Based on the current arc, I don't see myself stopping doing libraries, because so we haven't talked about the STB libraries really. So maybe we should segue to that. I don't know if you have specific questions, but so what I was going to just say there is that one of the many, as I said, or maybe this was in the stream that got cut off, but there are many reasons that I made the STB libraries. Many things that led to them.
Upon that, so if you want to touch upon it, yeah.
Many things that led to them being structured the way they are, being public domain, being all those things. And, I gave the one example, we did get through that, right, of the library I made at Looking Glass. Yeah, I did talk about that. So, one of the things, though, is I make these libraries for myself. I make them because I want to package this functionality in a way that I can reuse 10 years from now when I don't remember how this stuff works. So I want it to be easy to use. It's the same as like writing comments for yourself or all those other things. The future you doesn't remember anything you know. Yes. So one of the things that I do, not always, not 100% of the libraries, but most of the libraries I make are actually for me. I make them reusable. I don't need them to be reusable right now, but I make them reusable now so I can reuse them in the future. And so I do expect till the day I die, as long as my mind is functioning, I will still be making STB libraries because it's the way I've found to do it. I mean, I guess if I know I only have a year to live, maybe at that point I don't worry about reuse because I'm not going to be reusing them. But who knows?
Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to try and start driving the conversation to the questions because I've received almost dozens of questions for you.
All right.
I'll have to pick some.
Because we haven't talked about the STB stuff really at all. But if everyone knows about it, because they've, Casey's talked about it plenty on Handmade here. So if everyone knows about it, that's fine. There's no reason to go into it.
All right. Yeah. And if anybody has a question about STB, just feel free to ask it. And I'm sure Sean will address it. So I think this comes from... Actually, before that, I'm sorry, guys. Keep asking questions. I'm compiling the list of questions. I do have one last thing for Sean, and that has to be with Handmade Dev. And you've seen some of the programs that have come out of it. One of them, like the site's not even released yet, but you've already seen, for example, For Coder by Alan Webster, or you've seen the project of Handmade Quake already in production. And, actually, this does tie into the first question we've gotten, and it's saying, this is from Maxwell Perman. Sean, we do not have remotely the same working conditions or amount of experience yet for us to recognize this handmade mindset as the right way to program, right? So I don't know what you think. Like if we have this community that's pushing out educational materials like Handmade Quake, or we have this community that's pushing out interesting, performant, useful products like For Coder out the door, and people recognize that as a good thing. Like, won't that create a space where we don't ever have to think about that somebody has to program in Java? Like, do you believe a future where these languages can actually be eradicated? Or do you just not even care? Or do you think that's never going to happen?
Well, I think... I think the problem is that the space of software, like as we were talking about, like what are the forces that led to this situation, and which is a bit of a mystery. I mean, it's probably not a mystery. I'm sure there's people who are confident they have the answer, and they're probably right. But we talked about like the proliferation of software, just how much software there is out there,
exactly.
And
yes.
It feels to me like no, like the handmade thing is like people who want a certain kind of quality. And not everyone does. Like you're. So I mean, you take the mythical, hypothetical Sean Barrett, who is the awesome awesome programmer who everyone says he is. Who is 10 times better than any other programmer. Let's just hypothetical one. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. I'm just saying. Let's hypothetically suppose that guy exists.
Okay.
And you team him up with 3 other guys who are 10 times worse, and you drop his productivity by 50%. Clearly, he is now delivering, the total group is now delivering less quality code than he was by himself. That mystical, hypothetical 10x Sean. Right, because he's now only at 5x them, and 5 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 8. So you would have been better off not adding the 3 people to the team. Okay, that's the fantasy.
Yes.
So there's a handmade fantasy, which I'm not saying anyone in the handmade world actually believes, but I just want to like call this out explicitly, which is, you put a really good programmer who understands his stuff on it by himself, tiny team, whatever, so they don't ruin their productivity, and you can get the software out. And could we just educate everyone to be that guy? And I assume the answer is no. I don't know why. I don't know the details. I haven't thought about it at all, but it seems like no. That's just not the nature of the world. You can get those isolated programs. We can get some people doing this, but it doesn't sound right to me that you'd get the entire world into that mindset.
Okay.
And they'd all need to be 10x programmers anyway. So, so you've got to compromise. You've got to have teams of 50 people. You've got to have software practices that work with teams of 50 people. And I think it is unclear that there is the handmade philosophy works on teams of 50 programmers. Yeah, there are definitely cases where you can divide up the project cleanly enough that everyone just works in their own thing. Maybe there are success stories. I don't know anything about how NASA programming is. Maybe it can be done. But my intuition is that no, like that's going to proceed in isolation. You're going to have people who can do this stuff, and most people are never going to be doing that. Sorry. So the reason I went there is because I was talking about that, like who wants the quality, right? Normally you're trading off, fast, choose three, cheap, fast, good, whatever the things are. And the idea there is that the 10x programmer maybe steps out. Maybe the 10x programmer can step outside that curve and just make something that's all three because he's 10x. But there's only so many 10x programs to go around, even assuming the fantasy is true. And the rest of us are stuck with cheap, fast, good. And so the handmade philosophy may not be adaptable to situations where you have to compromise on one of those three things.
So it seems, after talking to you and Casey Mortori and other people, that I'm inclined to agree myself. So I think Handmade Dev is more about creating a community where we're legitimizing our approach to programming against a proliferating software community where they don't appreciate this, and we can just gather around and push our quality software out the door. But we're not pretending that we're going to be able to convert everybody to program in this way, which is what I think you're getting at. And I must agree, even NASA, which I think most of them there do a great job at launching rockets, for example, they come out there out of their own accord, and they already have that kind of natural affinity towards low-level programming. So yeah, I see that. All right, I'm not sure, John.
Well, wait. So, what's the question that you were answering? What is the right approach to getting into the handmade mindset?
Yes.
Was that the question? Because that's actually a little bit of a different question.
I see.
Because that's a question of like, how do you as an individual like? So, it's an interesting question to me because it's something I touched on in my talk, which is that if you think of handmade as a reaction, you realize there's something wrong with the other stuff, and you like find this new way. The argument that I made in my other talk was that I don't think that's a thing you can teach exactly in the sense of this is a bad way to do things. Not handmade, but the existing approach is bad. Use this other thing. I don't think that's as an evangelical method going to be very successful.
Okay.
And what I argued there was just that what I hope is that by calling attention to the fact that I like had this transformative experience, let us say, in which after encountering certain bad things, enough times, I eventually realized this is bad, let me do it a different way. The idea that I'm proposing is that we shorten that cycle so that people maybe only have to encounter it once. And then they go, wait, that's what this guy was talking about. Let's go try doing it this other way he was talking about. So they stopped and maybe have the bad experience, encounter whatever it is that promotes that thing, the terrible software or whatever. But with that one experience, they get there, instead of them having to get there themselves after a lot of bad experiences. That's my theory.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And with that, I think we're already officially in the Q&A. So are you okay with that? Let's do the Q&A.
Oh yeah, no, I am happy to keep going.
All right. So we have, if you have any questions, just make sure you spit them out there in the chat, and I will try to get them to Sean. So the next question comes from FFSJS, Jesus Christ. Sean, what can we do to have you doing more streaming? I for sure, and probably many other people, would enjoy you walking us through your code. So
primarily this is talking about OBBG, which is another product we didn't talk about, or a project.
Yeah, you can talk about it now a little bit if you want.
And in fact, I wouldn't even call OBBG walking people through my code. I would call it, live coding in the traditional set. Like I'm inventing the solutions and struggling with them and worrying about them, which I think is very different from like, oh, I'm going to show you how I have some code here. Let me show you how it works. And so I just want to make it explicit that that's the question I'm answering here. Yeah. The answer is there's nothing you can do. I'm still intending to work on it. I just, yes. I did a little interview for a site called The Setup, usethisthis.com, which is just a text interview, and where when I tried to give my bio, I realized that the STB stuff falls at the bottom of a very long list of priorities. I have I'm even working on music is actually a higher priority for me than the STB libraries. And OBBG is somewhere around the STB libraries currently in my priority list. And so it just doesn't rise to the top quite often enough. Now, one thing that happened is I developed a cough last year. I stuck around for 6 months and I didn't really want to try to stream while that was going on. And that kind of got me out of the habit. And then I was going to try to start right around the new year and I got a cough that stuck with me for 6 weeks. So I couldn't start when I had intended to. But I do plan to try to get back on that relatively soon. The other kind of streaming that I do besides OBBG is doing STB stuff. I would like to do an STB library from scratch on stream, but
yes,
I haven't had a library from scratch in a while, except like this. I got this idea back before I did STB voxel render, but I really wanted to do the STB voxel render trailer, so I couldn't live stream the development of it because I didn't want to spoil it, because the whole point of that trailer was to release on April 1st when people wouldn't know whether it was an April Fool's joke or not. So and I haven't done a new library since then, so I'm keeping my eye out for that. I would like to do one of those full on stream. That's why I started OBPG, really, was because I didn't have an STB library to do on stream, and I was like, let me do something from scratch on stream. I also once in a while do STB maintenance on stream, but it's not very interesting, so I haven't bothered. If people really are interested in STB maintenance on stream, I'd be happy to do it, though. But it doesn't seem that useful to me.
Okay. If you guys want Sean to stream tomorrow, I'm kidding. But I would love to. I'm your moderator, and I'll go to every single one. Anyway, the next question comes from the one and only Alan Webster, who's developing for Coder, actually. He's asking you, if you prefer to work alone, Sean, why does your sense, I guess your aesthetic sense, of API library design work so well?
Okay, yeah. So...
I get it, because you're not on a team, so you don't understand how people are going to use it.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. So there's a couple things here, right? So one is that, like I said, I'm designing the code to be reused by me, and this actually gets at one of the origin stories for the STB libraries. As I said, there are multiple, and they're all true. It's all those factors combined. So one of the biggest motivations was that the PNG library, libpng, has a terrible API. There's also JPEG that was much earlier library, and the PNG guys. One of the things that JPEG has is that if it runs out of memory or runs into some failed problem, it does something called long jump, which is basically C++ exceptions in C, sort of. So it just jumps out of where it is and goes all the way out. And they require you to write the exception handler around it. That's part of the API, which is just insane. Nobody ever has done this. Like, you have to, when you call the JPEG library, you have to wrap it in a set jump so that they can long jump. It's insane. It could easily live inside their API at the top level. They didn't do it that way. I don't know why. So libpng copied that same API design of having this exposed long jump, set jump thing that you have to put in your code. And because people working in Unix, all of their libraries live in standard locations, all their headers live in standard locations. And so PNG uses a compression library called zlib internally. And for some reason, they make their public header file for libpng include the public header file for the zlib compressor, even though you as a user don't need zlib at all. And so when you're on Windows and these things don't have standard locations, it means whenever you want to use PNG, you need the DLL and the lib, and you need the PNG header, and you need the zlib header, and I think one of those might have more than one header. Yes. So you need all of these files. And I was like, that's just not right. Like, that's not the API design. That's the infrastructure, the build system design. And I was like, that's just not right. And so I would always have these wrappers for JPEG and PNG that did the set jump, long jump, and the APIs for them were very complicated because they wanted to handle the case that you're progressively loading. It's coming down a network and you're partially decoding the image as it comes down. Very important for browsers. They actually need it, and I don't care about it at all for STB image. So I was like, I'm going to make a much simpler API and do this. So I already had wrappers to do this, and I would have to carry the wrappers and all the files around all the time. And I was like, I'm just like, this is, tiresome. And then finally, the main thing was that I'd always, I talked about, I read these Byte magazines. I was always interested in the technology. In college, even though I was doing this tech stuff, I kept following the graphics research and stuff. But anyway, so I knew about JPEG. I knew how it worked. I'd read, a Dr. Dobbs article about the idea. And I'd always been curious to write a JPEG decompressor, but the spec was not publicly available. It was an ITU spec or whatever. And you had to pay, I don't know, $100 to get it. And this is pre-internet being that widespread or whatever. Right. But even once the internet was coming along, they didn't make those publicly available. So one day, fateful day, I noticed that W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, they have the HTML specification. And one of the things HTML can include is JPEG files. And so they had put the JPEG spec online for free. So I downloaded it and I implemented it. And so one weekend, I took the JPEG spec and I just sat there and I wrote code, and that took me a day. And I was like, okay, let me wrap that up nicely. Okay, now instead of having to carry around a DLL, a lib, multiple headers, well, it was only one header for JPEG, so 3 files. Instead of having to carry around 3 files, I can just have this one file that I carry around that can do the JPEG decoding for me. And they was like, well, as long as I've done this, let me spend the rest of this weekend and I'll write a PNG decoder and put that into the same library. And so I had this one header file library that I wrote in a weekend that could do both JPEGs and PNGs, one file instead of the 3 files for JPEG and 5+ files for PNG. And again, on Unix, this all was fine. Nobody ever saw the 3 files and the 5 files. They just lived in the right places and just worked. But in Unix, there's in Windows, there's just no standard directory where any of these things live. Whenever I would move to a new machine, I would maybe I'll try creating a lib directory where everything lives all the time. And I never got it right, and it never worked, and it was just a mess. And I was like, if I just make one file for myself, my life will be happy.
It will be happy, yes.
So, all right, so that part of the answer to his question is, this is all for me. I was making everything that I could easier for me, and that includes the API design. And so I want the API to just do the simplest thing. Now, I have to, when I design the API, think about other people's uses. So it's not quite that trivial. So the other half of that question is other people. You can work in a team where your team is like, we have split this product up into 4 executables, and there are 4 of us. So each of us is going to work on an executable, and we're just going to communicate some other mechanism through the executables, and we all write our own code in our own style. You can do that project, and it can be great. You have to pick something that divides up well. You have to communicate well what the API is between those executables. Sure. So I'm not opposed to that kind of scenario at all. I would be totally comfortable working in that environment. I could work in that environment with a team of 100 people if I only had to interact with 2 other people's executables and I got to control over my executable. It wouldn't matter that there were 100 people. You need some architect there who understands the whole system.
Right, exactly.
You can't really go that way, but the whole the big company as a services kind of model goes in this direction. They split their product up into all these small services, and the services communicate on their local networks. Mm-hmm. It is a technique that people are using to try to solve this problem of not having the giant team working on a single product. So I'm sensitive to those things. I'm not opposed to working with other people. I'm just opposed to the morale the morale loss I take from working with too many other people, or working with people who aren't at least as efficient as I am, or around as efficient as I am, or whatever. I guess that covers it. I mean, yes. There's more subtle details, but whatever.
Yeah. Something I liked from what you said about the libpng and these other libraries, how the infrastructure was part of the way that you had to use it. You have to mess with the infrastructure, I'm sorry. It reminds me of the time I was trying to do this talk called What Programming is Never About.
I mean, to initialize
and which I'm actually playing right now for the stream real quick. Yeah, so I was messing with the build system. I grew up with Linux, so whenever I would build projects, I would just use the Unix terminal for that. There you can see the video now. And I was struggling a lot to try to get my project, which was a text editor project, to build with SDL on Windows. And I'm sure many people have fainted right now because of that, what I just said. And I spent like 20 minutes, was it, Sean? Because I think you were there, trying to get this build system to work, and I just couldn't make it happen. And once I did realize what was going on, then my time was lost there. And then after that, you made a talk in response to sort of how to make a build system more automated, right?
and then pop in.
So when did you first realize that you
common.
have to wrangle this build system and get it under control for your projects? Like, when did that happen? Did it happen once you were dealing with the Thief project, or was it much earlier in your life?
Do I have it? Yeah.
Well,
we just run build and let's see what happens.
Now, I started with, until I got to Looking Glass, I was doing Unix programming, and it was really never much of an issue. You made your makefile. I was only making small projects, that it was never really much of an issue.
Yeah.
One of the things that I ran into Looking Glass that was an influence on the STB libraries as well was we had a shared technology group that made libraries that all the games could use. This was software rendering days. So when you wrote a texture mapper, the texture mapper wasn't very game specific. You could write a texture mapper and just reuse it on all the games. So we had this reusable library core.
Yes.
And not a knock on what those guys did. It was awesome. It was great for what it was intended to do. It exactly was awesome for that. But what it was not intended to do, let me be explicit. What it was intended to do was be used in large video games. Now, of course, a large video game at the time we were doing this was 120K lines of code rather than the million or whatever that people are talking about nowadays. But one of the things this meant, and it's an issue that Casey may have talked about, because I don't follow Handmade here myself, is this idea that the API design changes based on your assumption about the scope of the needs of the API change depending on the scope of what the project that's being used in. And so that's the abstract philosophical statement. Let me be explicit. Yeah. When you're making a large video game and you need to use this library, it's okay that it takes you half a day to hook up the library in some sense, because that time is amortized over this large project that you're working on. When you want to make a quick and dirty tool in an hour to get some little thing done, I want to visualize this thing or whatever. Yes. And the libraries that you're working with expect you to be writing a full-scale video game. Those assumptions can easily mismatch what you're trying to do. It's too hard to integrate. They assume you have all this other stuff set up that you don't have set up, et cetera. And so when I was at Looking Glass, I ran into this problem. I would want to make these little tools, and I would find that the libraries that we had just couldn't be used reasonably for the task I was doing because they were too much work to integrate, or just assumed too many pre-existing environment things that I didn't have in the quick and dirty tools. And I've already forgotten the question.
Your experience, your experience with, when did you start automating this build system?
So even there, I could use the Looking Glass build system to build these little projects. I probably didn't, though. I don't remember. But I saw that problem of systems not being designed to be incorporated easily, saw the friction due to that. And that was when I learned that lesson of, like, you want to minimize the friction, if for nothing else, because small projects, it cannot use it if the friction isn't minimized, because it's just too much time to be worth the effort. It wasn't specifically build system at Looking Glass, but that was where I saw that issue arise. And so then, but at Looking Glass, I was on DOS and Windows, and that's where you encounter when you start trying to use third-party libraries, you discover, there's just this whole split in the world, at least there was 10 or 15 years ago, between the Windows and Unix. And you could see this all the time when academic projects would come out. We talked about this a little bit, that, have some weird license or whatever, but they would release and they would almost always only be buildable in Unix. You could just only use them from Unix at all, in what was released. And if you needed to use them from Windows, you had to figure it all out from scratch. You had to fix all of their assumptions about Unix or whatever. And it makes perfect sense because that's the environment those guys were using. Right. But it's clearly... it's not a user-centric design. And so, again, the user-centric design of the STB libraries comes from the fact that I want to use them myself. Is the starting point. Once people started using them, I had to kind of take a second look and make sure I was really serving those people well, which is just the thing I was saying about before about don't be lazy. Once you really want other people to use your code, you have to spend the time to make it usable by them. Otherwise, you're just wasting everyone's time. And I don't want to waste everyone's time, so I do that work.
Fantastic. And then let's go to the next question. Actually, I'm on my last wine glass. I'm not sure if you're drinking yourself. Oh, you are. All right. Cheers. This is awesome. So next question comes from Cuber Caleb. He's asking, are there any asterisk. You know, I block off and I censor all languages from the chat, like C++, C, so you can't really see it just because I want to avoid language wars. I think he means C++. Are there any C++ features that you feel like you are missing out on because you stick to pure C?
Well, I think I've probably talked about this at length, and you know, my opinion at this point is a little dated in that, you know, I last used C++ seriously at Looking Glass, so I don't remember exactly how I stopped. I don't remember the timing of that, but you know, so that 2001-ish, the two towers fell and I stopped using C++. Is that too soon? Sorry. So I'm not exposed to the modern features. I'm stuck using an old C compiler that predates C99, so I don't even get declare anywhere.
So you have to declare all your variables at the beginning?
I have to declare all my variables at the beginning of a scope. I occasionally just insert dummy scopes so that I can declare a new variable somewhere. However, I'm of two minds about this. I actually wrote a long rant about this and deleted it off my website because as the times changed, it was no longer interesting to argue it. There is a value to the fact that all declarations have to appear in a particular place so that when you're looking at a piece of code and you're wondering what type is this variable, you can glance up and there is a particular spot where that variable must be declared. I mean, a couple spots because of multiple scopes, but whereas with declare anywhere, it could be anywhere in the function. Now people reply, well, the smart editor, you just mouse over it or hover over it or whatever, and it shows you what type it is. And I'm like, I'm looking at GitHub in a web browser. Like, I don't get that feature.
You're right.
So yeah, and that's kind of an edge case. I always make that argument, but obviously that argument is a little bit of an edge case because we do spend 95% of our time or 99% of our time looking at code in an editor. I dislike anything where you require editor smarts for a system to work well. But that's probably at this point more me being a curmudgeon than anything to do with it. So declare anywhere is the most obvious feature that I am missing out on. But that I'm of two minds about whether it's whether it would be an improvement to have it in my code or not.
Gotcha.
You know, and this gets to like my old argument about syntax highlighting, which is I like almost no syntax highlighting. You know, it possibly, if you had declare anywhere and every declaration was highlighted, like the variable where it was declared and nowhere else was highlighted, that might be good because then you could, when you want to scan and find where a variable was declared, you know, you just look for that color and you spot that color and your eye is drawn to that color and you can find it very quickly. So that might be okay. But again, the GitHub doesn't have the syntax coloring, so you know, the right syntax one. So who knows? So that's the biggest thing. I think, you know, there was an interesting article that went by on Twitter where a guy was talking about how his coding style has changed. And he's a C++ programmer. And he basically described all these things he's changed. And it was basically that he was programming C. You know, and he didn't say that, but he just had moved away from inheritance. He had moved away from all sorts of things. You know, so I'm bringing this up because maybe some people have seen this tweet. I saw this article, I mean, and what was I saying? Oh yeah, so shoot, there was something that he mentioned that now I've forgotten. So let me just, sorry.
I'm trying to find the question myself. Don't worry about it.
And now I'm discarding it. So you know, another one that comes up a lot, I think, is operator overloading.
Yes.
And I'll say the same thing that I always say about this. So the philosophy that most people bring to operator overloading is only use it for math because it's too confusing to use it for anything else.
Yes.
And I accept that. It's a perfectly valid argument. I'm not. It's possible that I would succumb to the temptation if I were using C++ that I would use operator overloading for math. But I'm about to tell you why it's excusable. So, gosh, I keep pushing here, but so like a language like Go that doesn't have containers and doesn't have operator overloading, that's one of the things people complain about. It doesn't have operator overloading even for math, like how terrible or whatever. Maybe Go does, I don't even know. But like it's a common kind of criticism for languages that don't support operator overloading. And so what I'm about to say is really more of a defense for why your language can not have operator overloading and it's still okay, than it is a criticism of people using C++ operator overloading for math. So because the question is like, how do I feel about C? This is a thing where it's a defense of C as a language that has no operator overloading, why I don't think it's that big a deal. And the defense is very straightforward. There are many things that we do in programming. Many subject matters, our variables represent all sorts of different things.
Right.
One thing that they can represent is math.
Yes.
And a bunch of people have said, you know what? It's really convenient if the subject matter you happen to be writing about is math, if you get this special syntax that lets you talk about math in this way that maps more directly to the syntax that mathematicians use.
Correct.
But if it's any other subject matter, people are like, yeah, that's fine. You have to write these functions in this complicated way. And so my reaction is, yeah, math is not, even writing a 3D engine, math is actually not what most of my code is doing. And so the couple places where I'm manipulating vectors and I have to write them in this gnarly syntax doesn't really bother me because it's, as a proportion of the code, not that big a deal. If all you were doing is math, you want to use Mathematica, you want to use something that literally lets you use the math notation. That is all a sort of a posture, that argument. If you're in C++ and you use operator overloading for math, fine. It's a little weird because they could be a 16 by 16 matrix or a complex number. The performance constraints of those are very different. And so from sort of a handmade perspective, it's a little odd. As a C programmer, one of the things I'm used to is that being very explicit about what the performance thing is going on, and operator overloading can hide that. And that's another reason why I'm kind of, I don't feel like I'm missing out by not having operator overloading. So the answer to the question of what C++ feature am I missing, am I giving up by doing this, is almost every single one I can think of, I don't actually find that I'm missing it. But it could all be a post hoc rationalization. I don't know.
Yes. All right, that was a good remark, good answer.
I'm sorry if all my answers are long and this Q&A is just going to go forever.
Everybody's enjoying that very much. And we still have 20 minutes left, so we have more than enough time to answer these questions. So a lot of these questions are you going to stream again? So he already covered that. So let's go to the ones that don't ask that. One question was for me, which was, if you want to take a little break there, one question was for me, and it's, how do you get into the handmade mindset? And all I can say is, have you completed a single project, no matter how small, that requires programming in a way that you understand what's going on behind the scenes? So have you tried a project, in C? For example, just an example, have you tried a project in C, even if it's just a snake game, right? Or a Tetris variation? Have you completed a project, and seen it through that you feel comfortable showing your peers or showing your friends what you've done, right? Once you do that, I think you will understand pretty much everything Sean and I have talked about today, about what it means to sort of be well practiced in this kind of programming in a way where you have to solve problems and not just glue together these frameworks, like I said. Anyway, back to Sean. I'm sorry, I only gave you a really short break. Sean McGrath. I don't know. Do you know Sean McGrath?
Yep.
All right. He is the creator of Diet. He's an indie game developer, and he's also done extreme interesting work with N++ and other games, I believe, in other projects. He's asking, I lost it. Where is it? Sean, where are you? Let me scroll down. I don't see it, but I remember. He was asking whether or not you'd be okay with accepting his STB style Vulkan API, because he's going to make a Vulkan API STB style anyway. So would you be interested in hearing or seeing his work and accepting it into the list, I suppose?
That sounds like a question that should be taken off stream, but for the people who are curious, the answer is yes, with some weird asterisks, just because somebody else is also already doing it. But
and I found the question, by the way. I'm sorry, just to say it officially.
Okay.
Saying, I have a question about STB. Do you want me to do the STB style Vulkan library that I'm going to do anyway? So
yeah.
All right. Fair enough. Taken offline. There you go, Sean. Message him separately. All right. Let's keep checking out the questions, Sean. Let me drink my wine real quick here. This one is from Popcorn. Popcorn is asking if you have any wrist or hand problems. And if you do, how do you deal with it, or how do you avoid it?
I don't have a good answer to the last part of that. So, my story of wrist issues is back when I was working at Looking Glass and I quit for a while. This was back in the days when we had CRTs, and CRTs were these big, heavy contraptions. And I was living in a tiny, Looking Glass did not pay very well. I was living in a tiny room in a house called the House of 10 Dumb Guys, which was a house a bunch of MIT students had bought and lived in and rented out some of the spare rooms, most of whom worked at Looking Glass with me. So I was living with a bunch of coworkers, and I had a tiny room, and I quit Looking Glass one of those times that I quit Looking Glass. And I had a futon on the floor rather than a bed. And I started programming sitting up on the futon with the CRT like sort of next to me, right next to the futon, and the keyboard in my lap. And I just started programming that way to like try it and see.
Yeah.
And I started getting really bad wrist problems. Very slowly, just slowly over time, my wrist just started getting worse. And it happened, and I was eventually like, well, I have changed my, the way I sit. So let me get a desk set up. Let me put all this stuff on the desk. Let me switch to typing on a desk, and it went away. And that's the entirety of my ever experience with repetitive strain injury. So my answer was I changed how I did it, and it went away. So sorry.
Well, that's fine. And everybody has, like, Sean McGrath is also having his own issues. So each case, it depends too much on the context. So I don't think he can give you a very general answer or prescription. I'm sorry. Next question comes from Miblo, and actually this question embodies what the Handmade dev community wanted to ask you for a long time. So take your time answering this. What pieces of software, right? What pieces of projects?
Oh yeah, I saw this.
Yeah, do you want to see made and that you don't have time to make yourself, right? Because we'll take it on.
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer. Again, in that little text interview that I mentioned, there was a very speculative question about, what would, in your ideal world, what would things be like? And my answer there was like, I make the libraries that I need. So I don't have that much need for them. As soon as I perceive a need, I start writing the code. And these days I tend to write them as the SDB libraries. So there are lots of things that could be better, but I don't know that SDB libraries are the things that are going to make my life better. So I don't know that there's anything the Handmade community can do about it.
Okay.
And so as long as I'm on that subject, I'll bring it up, and everyone from the Handmade community will nod and imagine the fantasy world where this was true and sigh at the fact we're never going to get there because we can't get everyone to be Handmade developers, which is the fantasy world where all software works well. So that the things I'm interacting with, the programs, not the libraries, but the programs are well behaved, do what I want, aren't inefficient, don't use cumbersome ways of doing things, have a sane workflow. The operating system gets out of your way as much as possible. When programs and operating systems update, they don't change your workflow. You can just keep using your existing workflow. Operating systems do not put barriers in the way like DRM or other things, et cetera, right? This is all the fantasy world. And the interesting thing about that fantasy world is that was the world that I grew up in on the 8-bit computers. The computers were a lot less powerful. The things we could do them were much smaller, much more limited, but we just did have that total freedom. Everything got out of our way. Everything just worked. Nothing upgraded ever. It was all awesome for the very limited set of things it could do. I do not want to go back to then. I do not want to be stuck developing for the Atari 2600, but boy, that's the thing. So, I signed up for the Handmade Dev. I probably didn't sign up right away, but I contributed to the Handmade Dev Patreon very early.
Yes.
The first version of this that I really saw was Casey's earlier manifesto, the Molly Rocket manifesto, which is very different because it's about game design, but it's the same sort of like artisanal, devotion to quality. And when what happened with the Handmade thing, the reason I didn't sign up for the Patreon right away was because I didn't bother reading. And as soon as I saw the Handmade manifesto, I was like, okay, yeah, that's exactly it. I'm signing up. And because you guys were these young guys and I'm the old curmudgeon, so I was just like, yeah, whatever. Handmade Hero, that's all boring, uninteresting stuff from my perspective. Like, who cares? I know all that stuff, so who cares? But the fact that you guys were taking this philosophy to heart, that by whatever mechanism you believe in it, is so amazing to me. So
Oh yes, and we're glad to hear that. We I don't think you have access or you've gone to the IRC for Handmade Dev, but
No, I haven't. But
okay, yeah, we're always talking about Sean Barrett. What projects would he like us to do? So we really do appreciate your input. So if you ever had anything to say, I think we'll pretty much get it done at this point. Um, just so you know there. Now let's continue. I'm gonna have to cherry pick some questions because we're running out of time, but some of these questions are still, when are you going to stream again? So you might want to get into that. Even if it's just STB maintenance, I think we need a Sean fix here. So give us give us a stream. Okay, one question comes from Dr. Jeets, and he's the one that linked the book earlier. So thank you. Can you think of any people in your early programming career that were really good mentors? And have you ever mentored any new hires or people, for example?
So let me answer the second part first. I've never mentored anyone. I did oversee someone else creating an STB library. There is one STB library that I didn't write, and it still has two STB libraries that I didn't write. The other one is something Fabian Rigorous wrote. And we put them under the STB moniker for brand reasons. I hate to say that. Right? That sounds so terrible, but it's like, it's an assurance of quality of, in the Fabian's case, he wrote the core and I adapted it into an STB library. So it was sort of my work, but the STB image resize is a library that Carmack, when he left id and went to Oculus, had some of the same experiences I had, where he was like, oh, I wrote this software at id and I don't have it anymore. I have to write it from scratch if I want it. He sort of had that come to Jesus moment of with respect to the STB library idea, philosophy. And so he tweeted this, what would be really useful is a library for image resizing that was just simple, trivial to use. You just throw it in, doesn't have to be the optimal, whatever, because lots of people spend lots of time on trying to make their image resizers optimal or whatever. Yeah. And so some random guy who follows me saw that and he was like, I really think I'm the guy to make that library. And he contacted me and he said, I want to make this library. I don't remember the process exactly, but I guided him through the API design in some crucial ways that make it way more usable. And I did some optimizations on it because he was not a super optimizing guy, because he was, I don't know, I don't want to say anything specific about him, but I presume he had not a lot of experience with this kind of coding. And I don't know if you can call that mentoring exactly, but it was a conversational thing. I wasn't just going in and fixing his code. I was, hey, maybe if you did it this way,
Right.
And that I'm comfortable with doing. Helping people make STB-esque libraries if they're willing to go down they don't have to brand it STB, but if they are willing to make public domain single file libraries that are usable from C, just because it doesn't have to be usable from VC 6. That's what I need for it to work. I'm not requiring people do that, but making it usable from C does mean that other languages can use it, because they can't use C++ APIs. So if they're willing to go that mile, and I think they have a clue what they're doing, I am totally willing to help sort of oversee and help out with the API design. I think that's the most important thing I can contribute at this point, because I'm relatively good at it, apparently. That level of mentoring is something that I'm willing to do.
You guys, you got it. Hurry up and contact him. Oh my God, that's exciting.
And there is on GitHub an issue on the STB repository that is libraries other people have asked for. So while I don't have any specific libraries I would like, there is a list you can look at of ideas for libraries that some people would be interested in. If you wanted to try your hand at writing an STB-like library, you're welcome to look at that list and ask for my advice on the API design. And that could be a more tighter relationship there if need be.
It's pretty awesome. And I think we only have time for 2 more questions, so I'm sorry about that. I'm going to pick 2 more questions. One, which I think was going to come up anyway, so let's just get it over with. Would you consider switching to JAI? And for those who don't know, JAI is a programming language being developed by Jonathan Blow, the creator of Braid and The Witness. Or Sean Barrett, or will you consider keep using C forever?
I'm afraid that the correct answer to this might eat up too much time, but I'm going to give the correct answer anyway.
We can go over 5 minutes, yeah.
So in the mid-2000s, when I was a solo developer, I got a little frustrated with C. It's really cumbersome to get some stuff done. And I've started designing my own language. And what I was designing this language for was the opposite of what John was designing JAI to do. Do we have any idea how to pronounce JAI? And that JAI is designed for game development. That's his very explicit goal. And my language was, I'm going to write my games in C. This is my language I use for tools. Because tools are where, it's that thing I was talking about, when I'm writing a small thing, having to deal with all the cumbersome overheads of stuff is annoying, and C had some of those for me. And so an example of this, back in the DOS days, when there was no virtual memory, so we had 64 megabytes of memory, and that was the memory. You could malloc 64 megs and you were done. If you tried to malloc more, the malloc returned null, and that's what you got.
Yeah.
And so what I did back in those days, early on, when I was writing tools, certain kinds of programs, because it was DOS, there was only one programmer running at a time. What I would do is I would like make some static arrays. I would, static int x sub a million or whatever, and I would exactly pick the numbers I would type for the amount of memory that was on my machine, so that it used up basically all of my memory. And that way, that tool could do as much as it could do in the memory that was available, and I didn't have to deal with mallocing and freeing. It was just a static array, just got out of my way. And then the next machine that I had 256 megs, and I tried to go use that old program, and I would go like change the numbers in it so it would now use a larger array.
Yeah.
Really dumb way to program, but got the job done.
Yeah,
and I didn't have to spend a lot of time on it. I just wrote the static array. So this is a classic C memory management strategies. You just define these global arrays. So the problem is that they're global. So like if your program has two phases and it first needs to use all the memory for this thing and then needs to use all the memory for that thing, these statically created arrays are terrible because they're, always allocated. So you can only use half as much memory. So it's not ideal, but it's how I worked around the problem. I wanted to build a tool quickly. I would do that. So in the mid 2000s, this was the very first STB library before STB image. I was kind of running into that and I was like, computers are fast, but malloc and realloc are really painful. Like, I could malloc an array if I needed it, but the whole reallocating thing when I don't know how big it is and I have to keep reallocating is just really tedious. C++ has a thing called vector in the STL that's an expandable array that's much more convenient to use. It just automatically expands. If you don't care about it, because you're writing a tool, you're not trying to be super optimal, you're just trying to be reasonably optimal. You just keep pushing stuff back on your vector and everything just magically works.
Yeah.
And in C, you can do this, but you have to use realloc. You want it to double. You want to keep growing the size by double. So you have a pointer and you have a size and you have capacity. So you have these three variables. And I would always have these programs I was writing that had these three variables for every array. And I'd have like 4 global arrays or something. And I would do all this work.
Okay.
And this was all kind of cumbersome. Boy, what is the question that I'm answering at this point?
The question was, would you switch over to a language?
Yes. Okay, so I told you this answer was going to take the whole time. So
no problem.
So eventually, I'm like, I should systematize this. I can make a struct that has the array and the size and the capacity stored in the struct. But now the problem is you want to type safe when you dereference your array. When you take an array reference, you don't want to like cast through some macros and have to cast it. It should just magically work. And if it's packed in a struct, I can't easily like make macros that do the right thing in a struct. It just looked like a nightmare. And I figured out this trick that I could do where you just store one pointer and the pointer points to this block of memory that keeps expanding, gets relocated and expands. And right before the pointer, it stores the extra data it needs, the length of the array and the size that's been allocated so it knows when it needs to double it. And I created that little and some macros that then emulate the C++ vector functionality. So I could push to the end, I could find the length. I didn't even bother implementing most of the vector types because really all I needed almost always was just pushing a new thing on the end and have it just automatically double without me having to pay attention to realloc, with it just doing the right thing, all being type safe. And I wrote this little set of macros and I was like, okay, this is helpful. Let me put this into this stb.h, I called it, which was just all the functions that I thought I might use all the time. I'll just put them in one file so I don't have to worry about it. Yes. And that was the first one that I put in. And once I had that, and then I eventually put in a string hash table. So it just maps the string with a hash table to an arbitrary pointer. Once I had those two things, when I would write tools in C using that, I suddenly found that I had my productivity back to 100%. for writing tools.
I see. Okay.
So I mentioned I started designing a language just for tools, and the idea was that it would be garbage collected and would have arrays that automatically resized, and they would do all these things and all this stuff. So I didn't have to worry about wearing tools. But I worked on that. I had an interpreter. It was partly written. The syntax in JAI for variable initialization versus variable assignment, where you use colon equals, but you can leave out some of the fields of that. That comes from my language.
Okay.
Because I'd gone a little ways down, and when very early in his design, I emailed him that idea, and he doesn't like syntax, people suggesting syntax, because who cares about syntax? But it was early enough in the project that he went ahead and took that idea on. And so I had gone down that path, but I was nowhere near done, and I need a debugger and I need all that stuff. And so instead, I made this stb.h, and I suddenly found that just those two data structures totally changed my tool programming. That was just magic. I just no longer cared about tools. I don't want to use stb.h in a game because it's doing a realloc under the hood, and if the realloc fails, the whole program will crash. If it runs out of memory, you're done. You can't use that my vector type for that thing. It's the way it's all macroized. It can't help dereferencing null at that point.
Okay.
So you can't use it in a shippable quality thing in theory. I'm actually using it on an editor that I'm making for RAD. And if the editor runs out of memory, it's going to crash. All right. So that was all explaining how I started down the path of writing a language for that stuff and ended up deciding that C was good enough if I augmented C with this one thing.
Yes.
And stb.h has now grown into all this extra awesome, interesting stuff and lots of terrible stuff and stuff nobody should ever use. It's just a giant mess because it was just all the stuff I thought of trying. And it is part of the GitHub stuff, but it's the one I tell people not to use to the largest extent. It's this is my personal stuff. You can use it. People do use it. People have submitted patches for it. It's totally usable, but I continue to want to fork it back to just the data structures that really make a difference, and maybe some of the file handling that really makes a difference, and all the experimental stuff that's also in there. Anyway, so to answer the actual question, would I use it? So sort of my initial reaction was no. I had sort of the opposite, feeling. That doesn't make any sense to me. But as watching him develop it, there's definitely some things he's done in there that are hugely valuable for highly optimized stuff. As an indie game developer, I'm not sure I need to go down the level of optimization that he's concerned about as much. There's some stuff there's this thing called data-oriented design, data-oriented programming, whatever it's called. And he's got some stuff in there for making array of structure of array stuff smarter. That's totally awesome. And in the SDV voxel render demos, maybe I really was pushing performance to the point that would have been useful. But most of the indie game development I don't even pay attention to performance. I'm just doing some 2D OpenGL immediate mode stuff, and it's all always fast enough, and I just don't care. So it's hard to say that the stuff I do currently would make any sense. However, all that being said, I don't like some of the things he's doing in it, but I like enough of the things he's doing in it that I imagine I will get behind any push to it. And if that getting behind it involves, helping write sample code or rewrite projects, I might do it for that reason, not because I need it personally, but because it's helpful to the project. He's never mentioned this. I'm just saying, I'm totally speculating here. And certainly if what he ends up with looks good enough, I imagine I would switch. It's really hard to say because I'm a very stick in the mud person. I tend to stick with software for a long time. I'm still using PC6. I still use an ancient email program. And the reason I use those things is because the workflow is better. And oh my God, I have a huge tangent here that I better not do. It's possible that I'm lying here because I am enough of a curmudgeon. Maybe I would just stay away from it because I don't want to switch. But I don't, there's nothing in the project that makes me say it's not worth switching to. It's just a question of whether he gets it done. There are things I don't like, but there are things I don't like. It's there's no drawback that makes it bad, and there's clear support, clear advantages. So I would think if it was realistic to switch to it, I would certainly explore it and might switch. So there you go.
Nice. And oh, thank goodness you're drinking because this is my last piece of glass. So I've run out of wine, and when you run out of wine, it's time to end the stream. So I'm gonna give you, I'm gonna give you one more question, and we'll finish the stream with that. But oh my God, there's so much to talk about, and so many questions we couldn't get to. I don't know if you're okay with coming back sometime later this year.
Absolutely.
All right, and finish off our conversation because my God, there's a lot to talk about here. Okay, last question that I'm going to pick is from Serge RGB. Sergio, he is a good programmer, I believe. I think he interned for Google, and he's been doing interesting work for Handmade Dev. His question to Sean is: you seem to have a very unique lifestyle, and then he cites examples like you have a vampire schedule, and so on. How do you think walking off the beaten path, or just doing things that people, I guess, would do normally, has impacted your happiness?
Yeah. So let me give the bogus answer first.
Okay.
So as is well known, research has shown that people adapt their happiness to their situation automatically and sustain the same happiness level regardless of what's going on. So of course, I'm just as happy as I would be no matter what. It's an inherent thing to the person and isn't really about their situation. However, that's well known, has been circulated a lot. Now, I recently read something casting doubt on all that research. So I don't remember the details of what I read that cast doubt on it. So you can't get out with that answer. That's the easy cheesy answer that you use to escape the question. And I wanted to get that out of the way. So the actual answer, let me drill down into one example, the vampire schedule. Excuse me. So the vampire schedule started when I was in college. I started being stuck. I was in a dorm and I would be in the dorm lounge late at night when nobody else was there. And I don't remember. My memory is really terrible. So I don't really remember what I did with my time or how I dealt with this. I definitely made I tried to avoid morning classes, but I would just be stuck. Like there's nobody else awake and I'm awake and I can't do anything. And it's not exactly insomnia, but, I don't remember really why that started happening or how I really dealt with it. I don't really remember the details. Okay. But at Looking Glass, I started into a thing where I would get later and later every day, and my schedule would sort of shift. And at some point they were like kind of made explicit, like, "Hey guys, you really need to be here at least." I don't remember what they said, but let's say 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. You have to overlap. You have to overlap that window. Was sort of the idea, like so that there's some time for everyone to communicate. That was sort of the idea. And I don't know if that was his response to me or if there were other people doing it or whatever. And my best guess, I honestly don't remember exactly what I did, but my recollection is that my schedule would slip, and when I was about to miss the window, I would pull an all-nighter, wrap around to the next window, and then sort of reset my schedule back, and it would start drifting again. Okay. So it felt in college like it was a nighttime thing, a vampire thing. And at Looking Glass, it was very explicitly this rolling schedule that was shifting in time.
It's fascinating.
Now, after Looking Glass, when I was in indie dev, I could just do whatever I wanted. I could program whenever I wanted. I didn't have a huge social life, so it didn't really matter when I was awake. So I intentionally let myself drift at that point. I never set the alarm. I would just wake up when I would wake up. And that was a huge morale boost, happiness boost potentially, because I can't nail down concretely, but it just always felt like when I was being woken up by an alarm, I was just not productive. I was a little grumpier or whatever for some amount of time. This is the life that most of you lead, and maybe you have this problem or maybe you don't. Maybe this is a universal thing that I just have worked around, or maybe it was a little more unique to me, but it just did not work well. I was not as productive, and being productive makes me happier. So, I make the SDB libraries because they make me happy. It's not a selfless thing. Like helping other people makes me happy, right? It's this weird, messed up thing. So, in that same way, this was it's absolutely true that taking that allowing that schedule freedom did increase my happiness. It's 100% why I went down that. It did come at the sort of expense of ever developing a social life. So, not I don't know how that trade-off shakes out 100%, but it certainly feels like the right thing for improving my happiness. That's a deep drill into one aspect of that. And you were sort of asking in general, and that the general question is too hard to answer. So I just thought that would be useful to give it a specific.
Oh yeah, sure. I enjoyed that remark actually. Well, close to 200 viewers. I'm sorry that I have to end it here. But how about we finish off with one question from my part, Sean?
Well, let me just before the sign off happens, I just want to say I will stick around and chat. So if people aim questions at me, which is nothing's two, so that I see them, you'll have to re-ask any old questions. I'll see them. So after the stream ends, I will do that.
Please do. So if you had any questions that I definitely skipped over, I'm sorry. Ask them to Sean at nothing's two, please. Moderators, please give the username to him, to the chat. I'm sorry. Anyway, so my question would be, what would you say to all these young programmers, from the Handmade dev community, with your experience? What kind of advice? What piece of advice would you give them in order to become, I guess, a better programmer, in order to sort of fulfill their their life dreams or something like that? So let's end with that. Let's end the stream with that question for you.
People ask what books should I read to be able to do X, or what should I, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't read any of those books, right? And I kind of feel like that about that whole question. Like everyone is a unique snowflake, and I'm not in a position that I can judge what is going to work for other people.
Yeah, but clearly a lot of people look up to you, right? So
yeah,
but I know your thoughts.
But my thoughts are about what works for me, not what works for them. No, honestly, I really don't think it's that useful. Can we get? Do you have a more specific version of that question so that I have something that I can actually kind of?
Sure, why not?
Nail down.
All right, so let's say somebody is really interested in becoming an experienced C programmer, and by experienced I mean they are able to develop these large-scale projects one day in their career, just as the software rendering graphics part of the Thief project, right? What things would be good habits to develop in order to get that point, to get it done?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was talking about, is that I know how I got here, but I don't think that generalizes. And so it's really hard for me I don't want to give advice that's bad advice. And I have no idea that any advice I give would not be bad advice.
That's fair enough.
This is not me trying to dodge the question. If somebody wants to know what did you do to get here, I'll answer that. As long as everyone understands that I am not saying this is the right thing to do. And unfortunately, it's not very interesting. It's not. I don't think there's going to be anything actionable if I actually went down that path. So.
Okay, that's fair enough. But you must have.
I'm sorry. I'm just dodging the whole question, but I'm only dodging it because I honestly do not feel qualified to answer it. Which I know sounds like a cheat, but.
No, and that's we understand that. So something I do think though is that you've shown, and I'm going to go ahead and sort of answer the question for you, and then you can say yes or no. But
go ahead and do that. But remind me that I do have a thing I want to say on this subject. But you go ahead and do yours first.
Okay. So some of the things that are common threads among programmers like yourself is that they just truly do enjoy the process of making these products happen, right? As opposed to trying to do it because you think the product will give you a level of success or a level of financial success. And then that's why you're going to do it, right? So you really do enjoy the process unto itself as its own thing. And that's what drives you, I suppose. One of the things that drives you to actually fulfill these products to their whole, just because you do enjoy it. And so if you feel that you're a programmer that doesn't truly enjoy getting a software renderer done for your 3D game, or a programmer that enjoys the process of pushing out a game and shipping it through the whole, kind of steps that you have to do, then it's probably not for you. And that doesn't mean that you can't be a good programmer. It's just that that's just not the field for you. If you can't match your passion, right, with your career in that kind of way.
So I maybe agree with that. the thing is that I'm really used to that world where everyone that I in my peer group who programs loves to program. Like, it is satisfactory experience in and of itself. But I do not in any way want to imply that only programmers who enjoy it at that level can be 10x programmers. Again, I don't even know if 10x programming is a thing, right? I like just speculatively assuming it's a thing. You could imagine that all the 10x programmers are people for whom that's true, and anybody who's just like getting programming as a job is never going to be a 10x programmer. But I don't, assuming 10x programmers even exist, I don't actually know that's true. Maybe somebody is really good at programming but doesn't really enjoy it, and they could be an awesome programmer anyway, even though it's not like, I just don't know. Like, that's just weird. And I can even drill down into that a little bit. Sorry to extend your stream beyond the amount you meant. But when I was in high school, that was when I started programming in high school. And everyone knew, I went to a tiny high school. So we had 40 students per year. And so you knew everyone else in the year. And all the teachers knew basically all the students. And everyone knew I was really good at math and computers. To the point that my SAT scores, everyone was surprised I had a high verbal SAT score because they just thought I was a math guy. And the thing that I experienced in going through high school was I took to computers like the fish to water, but I was also very good at pure math. And I actually I went to university for some math courses. It wasn't like really university math. It's a crazy thing. But there was the state that I lived in had a math competition for high school students that, was totally voluntary. But, the people there at my school pushed me to enter it. And I forget what I think I placed 10th when I was a junior for my state. And maybe it was top 10, I think. I might have even been like top five my senior year or something like that. So of all the math students in my state, which was not that large a state, Maryland, I was, fifth or whatever, which, like, when you think about it across the whole country, it's not like I was the number one mathematician or anything, but I was pretty way past on the bell curve. But the thing that I had found was that I didn't particularly enjoy mathematics. It wasn't something I actually like to do. So when I was faced with the decision of what do I want to do with my life, there was never any doubt. Like, I had no interest in going into mathematics. I was really good at it, but it was like, and now my math skills have atrophied and I'm not as good at it as I used to be. And of course, you use math and computers and they're related and all that stuff. But it was like just this clear, like there was never any doubt in my mind. Of course, it helps that pure mathematics is not like a profitable thing the way computer science clearly was. So it's not like I was making a hard choice there between the profession where I'd get rich and the profession where I do what I loved. But there was just never any doubt in my mind. I was going to be a computer programmer. As I said, I didn't even major in computer science. I knew I was going to be a computer programmer, but there was no reason to major in computer science in college because that was just, that was just a foregone conclusion because I was both good at it and loved it. So absolutely what you're saying is true in one sense. But there is definitely this thing of, you can be really good at something and maybe you can find happiness in your life with a 9-to-5 job programming, being really good at programming and not loving it. That said, I feel like I said this very early. I feel like there's this correlation between being the handmade mentality and being the I love to program kind of person. It feels like that obsession with quality, that devotion to the cause, to put it kind of in religious terms, is something that's correlated, but that's speculation and I don't actually know. And I remember the point I wanted to go back to if we're done with that one.
Please do.
So the point I wanted to go back to is I actually contrast myself with Casey very strongly. Presumably everyone watching this is familiar with Casey Muratori and Handmade Hero.
Of course.
So Casey and I are friends. We have worked together on an open source projects in very small ways. He helped me a little bit on my project at RAD. And so we get along fine. We use each other's libraries fine. It's all well and good. But I very strongly disagree with his sort of, not disagree with. I have a totally contrasting philosophy. I'm very much, I don't know what's right. I don't know what's right for you guys. This is what works for me. And Casey is very much, this is the right way to do it. You should be doing this. And I'm not saying that either of those approaches is correct. I just kind of want to call out that it's kind of an interesting contrast. That deep down, I believe my way is right. I just don't say it. There's definitely a little of that. But there is also just some, it's not humility for the sake of show. Like, I know I don't know everything. I've been wrong in the past. I don't want to push people the wrong way. So there is room for differences of opinion here, even while we share many of the same things. As I said, the Molly Rocket Manifesto was 100% gold for me. So I totally support all of those things. Almost everything he recommends, specific things he recommends, I agree with. Sometimes I disagree with them, but the philosophy is absolutely different in some sense.
Yeah. Oh wow. Woo. This has been amazing. I don't know if you have anything else to say before we end the stream. But thank you so much for being here. Everybody has enjoyed this thoroughly. I can tell through their messages to me and the Twitter DMs and things like that. So we're definitely going to have you back again later in the year, because we have so much to cover still, right? But I hope you enjoy Handmade Dev when the website comes out, and that we can provide you with software that you said before that will be performant, that will be quality, that will make you understand that we're trying our best here to give a quality experience for end users of their computers. And with that, thank you guys for being here in the Handmade Dev Show. Thank you for asking questions to Sean, and we will make sure that next Saturday we have another guest with you, with us, here on the Handmade Dev Show. Give me a follow on Twitter if you want to know who my next guest is going to be in the coming days, or just go ahead and subscribe here on Twitch, and you will know when I stream again the next time. And like Sean Barrett said, if you have questions, and I know there's a lot of questions that I missed that you want Sean to answer, he said he's going to be on the chat. Is that correct?
Yep.
He's going to be on the chat. He's going to be answering those questions for you. So please ask them again. Miblo, Fiocon, whoever else was asking questions that I couldn't get to. So thank you again. Sean, I will end the call right now, but we will keep talking on the chat as well, okay?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, this was awesome. See you guys next Saturday. Take care. This was the Handmade Dev Show.